Father, thank you for this day. It's a beautiful day. And thank you for your grace that just is abounding. And help us to embrace it, Father. I don't know what form it'll take. I don't know how it will come. Could through people, things, whatever. But you don't do anything. You don't plow a field unless you intend to grow a crop. And so, would you just work in us? There's a week and a half left of this school semester. And you can do a lot in a week and a half, and I pray you do something, Father, that would work to change us into your likeness. And for your glory, I pray you do that, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so you're gonna have this on the final exam. You're gonna have something like this. It won't be exactly the same, but it'll be like this. So, you should pay attention to what I'm gonna do right now. So here, this is what I handed out to you. It was like this. It will probably be 1,000 meters, but 1,000 meters and 3,000 feet are equivalent. Basically, 20 degrees centigrade, that's where we're starting. We're starting on 0. And the only reason this air is gonna move up is because of what? Begins with an O, and it has graphic in it.
Orthographic?
Orographic lifting. Air doesn't want to go over this mountain. It just as soon chill down low. But it's going to be pushed. Let's say the ocean is out there, Pacific Ocean. So it's pushing, and it starts pushing here, and it's this. The dry rate, the dry adiabatic rate is 10 degrees per 3,000 feet. Yeah. The wet rate is 7 degrees. So we start at 20 degrees and we go up 3,000 feet. So it cools by 10 degrees. It's cooling. It's not warming. The dry rate, as it goes up, it cools. As it goes down on the other side, it'll warm because pressure increases. Pressure is decreasing here. Less pressure, it cools. So here is 10 degrees. And then you go up another 3,000 feet, and it's 10, it's actually, it's not that. It's 0 degrees. So from 20 to 10 to 0. Now this is a condensation level, which means the wet rate clicks in. At the condensation level, you start the wet rate, and this is 7 degrees per 3,000 feet. So you lose 7 degrees from here to here, so you're at -7 degrees. And you go another 3,000 feet, and you lose another 7 degrees, so you're at -14 degrees. And finally, -21 degrees. And the air is at this temperature all the way across. So this side is still -21 degrees. Okay. Now that is as cold as that air is going to get. It's been pushed up from 0 degrees here, 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 losing temperature all the way up because releasing pressure. Now we get over this side, and this air is going to start coming down. Now one person in the class got that far. So coming down, it lost all its moisture getting up this high. If you pushed it up higher, it would lose even more moisture. But right now, it's lost moisture. And so coming down this side, this is the dry side of this thing, it comes down and it loses 10 degrees. Condensation level is here, Well, it started to condense. It condensed here, it condensed here, it condensed here, so it condensed all the water out of there. But now it's heating up. It's not cooling down anymore, it's heating up. So it doesn't have as much moisture up here, because it dropped it all here. It started dropping moisture by condensation here to here to here to here. Well, now it's got less moisture than it started with. And so it goes, it drops 10. And then it drops another 10. And then it drops another 10. And then it drops another 10. And this was the only number that you didn't mention in all your numbers. You didn't mention this. You got 30, you got 28, you got everything else but
29.
So you go up the dry rate until condensation, then wet rate, wet rate, wet rate, but then when you come over to the other side of this mountain, it doesn't have any moisture to lose. So when it falls on the dry side of the mountain, it falls by the dry rate. And so, in the state of Washington, which is whacked politically, I mean, they're just nuts, totally nuts. But aside from that, you have the Cascade Mountains. And the Cascade Mountains, there's a lot of water in the Seattle area. And so you got the moisture pushed up over the Cascade Mountains. When it comes back, you see the difference between 20 and 29 degrees centigrade. Well, that's just with the same package of air. But you get Eastern Washington is a lot drier. They grow cherries, they grow a lot of fruit there. It's a lot drier, a lot more intense in the winter, but a lot drier. In fact, they got to irrigate over there. In the West Coast, this side, you don't have to irrigate. I mean, it's wet. So does everybody catch this? Hopefully? Okay. So that's why I gave that. I didn't grade this. I wanted you to do it, so you do it, and then you could see, oh, okay, I didn't do this or I didn't do that. So that's how that works. That's the mountain deal. So now this is going to be okay, this is 14. I passed back that. All the ones that were turned in, I passed back, that had been turned in like last time, I passed them back. I turned in late, then I got it, I picked it up. There's some more. Okay, so this is 14. This is 14, what you just added in. So when I'm asking you to do this, you can do it briefly. You can do it briefly, and you can mention a couple of words that relate to it. And if you just quote something, I mean, some of you are quoting things, and I would venture, if I was betting, I would bet you didn't know what it said. And you'd never repeat it on a test. If I put the same question on a test, you'd never repeat what you wrote down. It's out of the book. So technically, it's not necessarily correct in answering the question, but it came out of the book. But I would try to write something that you understand rather than just repeat it from a book. Look for the key word and then go for it. But describe a low pressure area on the surface and what the corresponding situation of air aloft is. So you're talking about what's on the surface, what's going on in the surface, and what's going on way above the surface, aloft. So there are two things happening. You got surface stuff happening, but you've got aloft stuff happening too. In fact, as we mentioned, I think yesterday, the aloft stuff has a whole lot to do with what's going on in the surface. So, a surface low pressure area, which you call a cyclone, is noted by converging counterclockwise surface winds. So in winds for a low pressure area, and this is why it can be, that's why I've said this part is a little confusing. So you've got a low pressure area and you've got winds that are converging. They're coming in on the surface. They're coming in. So if they're low pressure, you've got this here. You've got surface winds that are coming in like this. They're coming in a counterclockwise way, but the winds are coming into this low. Then you've got air aloft. So you've got converging winds. Winds on the surface, up above, you got to come out of here, so they're diverging. So whatever you have on the surface is going to be the opposite aloft. Got converging winds, they're counterclockwise at the surface, and they're drawn upward by diverging winds on top. So these winds are kicking out, and this air is drawn up. That's why it's a low pressure area. It's drawn up. The air is drawn up. It's rising in here. That's a low. When you've got a low on the surface, you got converging winds at the bottom. They're coming into it and being drawn up by the divergence that's happening on top. And if you had a high, it would be the same thing. Well, I'll get to that here. So you have that as rising air results in cloud formation and precipitation, because this air has some moisture, and if that air is drawn up, it's pulled up with moisture, and the higher it gets, pressure is less, and it reaches a condensation level. So you may not have rain, but you will probably have clouds. A low pressure area, you could expect to be cloudy, except if you don't have a signal. There we go. So as a result, so you got air rising, you've got a low pressure area, you got converging or counterclockwise surface winds drawn upward by diverging winds on top. As rising air results in cloud formation and precipitation, surface low would tend to have unstable conditions. Stormy weather, maybe a stretch, but at least unstable conditions. Okay? You're following that? Okay, that's good. In what ways are surface high and surface low different? Well, surface high pressure is noted by, well, this doesn't have any ink, does it? I guess I should use this. So here, you've got converging on top, pushing air down. So you got air up here, it's pushed down. So as it pushed down, this moisture is taken care of, and when it gets down, it spreads out, it diverges. So here it's the opposite. You have converging here and diverging on top. Here you have converging and diverging on the bottom. and this goes out. This goes out clockwise. This converges counterclockwise, this goes out clockwise. And it should be pretty clear because this wind isn't being pushed up, it's being pushed down. So it's heated as it pushed down. So if it had moisture in it, it was starting to condense up here, it would be heated as it comes down, it'd lose that, it'd go below the condensation level, and there it would be dry. So you can expect with a high, this is a high, and this is a low. So that's what they look at. You have a diagram, I passed out a diagram last time, that showed this, it showed divergence, convergence, you got it in your book, I think, but this, I put this diagram, and then this one talks about fronts, the other piece talks about fronts. But this is convergent, and so they're different. So this is actually stating the same thing as this one did for low pressure, except it does the same, then it goes on and talks about high pressure as well. That's why they're different. You got clockwise on the bottom versus counterclockwise, and you got the reverse on the top. Convergence, divergence, divergence, convergence. Plus, you've got fair weather versus unstable. So what influence does the upper level airflow seem to have on surface pressure? It can act to do 4 things. Dissipate, which means terminate, stop. Maintain, keep them happening. Or develop, increase in severity. Or it can surf a higher surface low area and the weather that accompanies them. So in this one, it depends how intense this is. If this is more intense than this, it's going to cause this low to become lower. And then you're going to get more radical weather. If this is greater, it's going to cause this high to become higher. If they're equal, if they're just equal, they're going to maintain what they are. But if this dissipates, if this slows down, it's going to slow down this. If this slows down here, it's going to slow this down. If this stops or terminates or changes, it's going to terminate this as well. So the upper level, the air aloft, has an effect on what's going down on the surface. It can cause it to stop or dissipate. It can maintain it, so it keeps doing the same thing that it's doing, or it can develop it. Those 3 in particular, and then the weather changes can change as how these change. So you can have changing weather as a result of what happens aloft, and the loft can either dissipate, maintain, or develop it. That was number 3. Sea breeze. Now some of you, I'm not sure how to, I've read the book. I've read the book more than anybody should have to read the book. And because I don't remember a lot of stuff, I read it again. And so if you put down an answer that wasn't really explaining it, you just jumped to the chase and said, well, it's a land breeze. Well, I don't know what you mean when, I know what the book means when it says it, but I don't know if you know what is happening. You can say, I can say sea breeze. Well, I know what a sea breeze is. A sea breeze is one of these things. The sun heats the land up faster than the water, the hot air is less dense, and so it tends to rise. So you got water You got land that's hotter, so the water, the cooler air around the water is drawn in, so you get a breeze in on land. And then that rises and it cools as it rises, and it kind of circulates like the earth does, the molten earth does, when we looked at that video of the warming and then getting to the top and then cooling back down and kind of going that circle. Same way with a heat register in the middle of the floor, does the same thing. So that's what, I mean, specifically that's what happens. And it says during daylight hours, so I'm specific about what time of day it is. Why is a low pressure area created over the land? Because the sun keeps up the land faster than it does the water, and so that's where you get a low, because it's heated up faster. And why is the cooler air over the sea drawn to land? Because air moves from high pressure to low pressure. So you can abbreviate that. But in this case, I want to know exactly what was going on, so I know that you know. In an attempt to equalize the pressure, the cooler sea air will be drawn to the warmer land. So 2 reasons. Air moves from this to this, and it does it with an attempt to equalize the pressures. If you didn't have that, you weren't counted off at all, but I wanted to see that air moves from high pressure to low pressure, so the cooler sea air would be drawn to the warmer land air. During daylight hours, so we're at the same time, what happens to the air drawn in from the sea? Well, it's drawn in, it's cool air, it's heated over the land, and it starts to rise. So that's what happens to the air drawn in from the sea. So the air drawn in from the sea is cooler. And when it gets over the land, it's heated up and rises, because it would naturally be more moisture laden, a lot more water in it. As it rises and cools adiabatically, clouds may form as condensation takes place. So that's the whole deal. I wouldn't want you to go any farther than that, but that covers it. It is heated and then rises, and because it would be more moisture laden, because it's just come off the sea, when it rises and cools adiabatically, then you have a greater chance of condensation. Cloudy, could have rain. Okay? Are you? Okay. And the last one, at night. So we're in a different period now. We've been during daylight. During daylight, all three were the daylight, very specific. This, why would this happen? Why would this happen? Why would this happen? And at night, the land cools faster than the water. So pretty soon, the water is warmer than the land. And now the water is the low pressure. You got a low pressure area over the water. It was over the land, and it drew moist air into it. But then when the temperature changes, it becomes cooler than the water, and so air over the land begins to flow out over the water. So with the water being warmer, a low pressure area is developed over the water, so this low pressure area draws the cooler air, more dense and higher pressure, off the land and over the water, and then it does basically the same thing, or circulate. But it's doing it over the land. So if you said land breeze, somebody says land breeze. Well, it's true. I mean, it is land breeze, but that's not why, that's what. So I was wanting to know why I did that. And that is the complete. And both of these are not long, they're not long, but they're complete. They touch on the main issues that's going on. So, okay, so that's 14. I think I gave everybody 5 points just on top of that, just to, because this one wasn't well fielded. And I can't tell why. I'm not able to discern why it wasn't well fielded. Because I know there's a lot of stuff happening. Oh, so our test is scheduled for, in this room, Wednesday from 3 to 4. So I'm not testing you to how fast you can do a test. So most everybody's out here pretty quick, but I'll bring stuff to do, and so I'm in no hurry. And there's nobody coming in afterwards into this room. So you have, and it's the final, but it's not, it's basically what we're covering, this material that we've covered in this section, from the last test to the end on Monday. So, and we'll cover that. And I've got in process a study guide. I haven't gotten it, I'll get it. What's today, Wednesday, okay. I should get it done tonight, I'm gonna go work on that. And I still got your questions. I couldn't find my rubric, and I found one. And so I will get observation 4 done. It doesn't have any bearing on what we're doing, what you're doing for the test, so I wasn't in a sweat about it, but I'll get that back to you. So, does anybody have an issue? I mean, I don't know, there is a class, elementary reading. Anybody that have elementary reading here? Teaching? So I don't know if anybody want to take it Monday night. I mean, I don't care. But if you would, then let me know by Friday. I can make arrangements to do that. And if it would work for you to have that extra time in the evening, rather than have it on Wednesday afternoon, take it on Tuesday night, I'd be willing to do that. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. I can accommodate both of them. So if you think about that and get back to me. Any questions about that kind of? Okay. Then. Now they changed the, I used to be able to print color until today. And so they've changed the code for color. I knew what it was on the old printer, or the old copier, but I don't know what the new one is, so I couldn't do this in color. Or I would have had blue in there. You can tell what the blue is if you look carefully, because it's a little vaguer and it's highlighted. But it's here anyway. So this is the Timothy Wallace article. It's been abbreviated a little bit, and I don't mean to spend all our time doing this, but I just want to go over, I had at one time a handout where you'd have to write down the definitions, but I thought that would be laborious at this point. So I'm going to go over this. If you have any questions about what I'm talking about here, please let me know. But the word theory, now what Timothy Wallace does is he lays out some things, a kind of a platform when you're evaluating evolutionary literature. It's a good idea to have some of these things in mind. Definitions are important. If somebody's quoting something, like somebody says, this is a fact. Well, a fact is beyond a theory. It's no longer a theory, it's something that's absolute, that has been tested and proven consistently over time. Well, evolution hasn't been tested. It's not testable. And it's interesting, we didn't have time to go through it, but how many of the discoveries that the media would say, missing link, missing link. And then they found it wasn't. It was a forgery, it was a fake, it was something that they later found out, well, no, it wasn't. And when you read the cover, National Geographic had a cover of this feathered bird that was the missing link. It was a reptile with feathers. Well, they published it, big deal. So a number of months later, I don't remember how many, I can tell you if I looked, because I've got the stuff. They found, no, that's not true. So what did National Geographic do? On one page, buried in that magazine, one little caption says, well, they found this to be not true. I mean, if you weren't looking for it, you would never see it. It wasn't part of an article. It was just a little note. I have the magazine, I'll try to get it to you, or show you. It's just, I mean, they buried this thing, so, I mean, they screamed that this was a deal. It was front page. It was front page on a couple of Science, I think Science magazine. Front page, big deal. And then I found later, and they retracted, but they retracted so you'd hardly know it was ever retracted. And a lot of people, for years then, went on thinking, well, yeah, reptile were found. They found it. We saw it in National Geographic. We saw it in Science magazine, except it wasn't true. And they found quite a few of these things that they tout initially. But definitions are important. A theory. Now, you're not gonna have to memorize. I'm not gonna ask you what's the definition of a theory. I'm not gonna ask you what's the definition of science. But in looking at Wilson's article, you need to be aware when he throws some of these words out, that he has a meaning attached to them, and they're not necessarily what's usually attached to them. And it's not, well, I'll get down. So a theory is a formulation of apparent relationships, of underlying principles of certain observed phenomena which have been verified to some degree. Verified, they've been tested. Well, you can't test them. Arguing it's not really a theory to someone that believes it is kind of a dead end. You're not gonna get any mileage off of that. You need to approach it from another direction. But the fact is, in science, it's really not a theory. A lot of people believe it, but just because, I mean, there are how many billion people in China? Just because they believe that one thing is right and everything else isn't, that doesn't mean it's right. Majority doesn't necessarily rule on this thing. So likewise, science, in most common English dictionaries, is this: the state or fact of knowledge, systematized knowledge derived from observation, study, and experimentation carried on in order to determine the nature or principles of what is being studied. That's what science is. Well, where does that contradict anything in Scripture? Where does that polarize religion from science? Because there have been many men and women that have done great work, scientific work, that have approached looking for these things just this way. They've tested it, they've come up with a hypothesis, they've observed, they've studied, they've tested, and they could come to the conclusion, and it was scientifically done. Let's go. Here it is. So science, when Wilson contrasts science with religion, he's saying that religion doesn't have anything to do with this thing. And it's not, it does. Not only in the scientific realm, but in my devotions, I found if I use this format to study, I don't test, well, I tested it, God has put me where I had tested and to know some of it's true. But when I look at the Bible, find out who's talking, who are they talking to, where they go. In fact, you've got a observation 4 was that. Who's talking? Who's talking to who? Well, in one, you find that God was talking to himself. Most people didn't get that. Well, not most, I don't know what this class has done. I've read some of your stuff, but I couldn't read it for evaluation because I didn't have my key. I needed to create one. So anyway, science does not contradict the study of religion. It doesn't do that at all. It doesn't deny that there's a God, or it doesn't affirm that there is a God. It's just a way of looking at things and trying to evaluate or determine the nature of the principles involved. So there's nothing out of the way. Well, Wilson makes a big deal about separating the two because it's convenient for his arguments. Neither of these definitions require or exclude particular frame of reference from which science or a theory must or must not be attached. It's important because evolutionists usually redefine both of these terms to suit their purposes by insisting that a scientific theory must conform to their particular religious philosophical frame of reference. And they do have a religious reference, and that's atheism. The majority of people who are going to argue this are going to come from a position where they don't believe there is a God, and so they're trying to take science out of that altogether. And so their philosophical reference is philosophical naturalism, which is there is no God, all that's here is the material. That's all we have. All we have is what's here. There's no supernatural intervention. There was no supernatural creation. It all came, it all is material. We live in a material world. I can't remember who said that, but it was a long time ago and probably not appropriate. Naturalism. Naturalism is a belief that the natural world is explained by scientific laws is all that exists. And there's no supernatural spiritual creation. That's what naturalism is. That's a philosophy. It's a philosophy. It's important to note that this is not the definition of science. This isn't the definition of science. It's imposed. Even though many evolutionary arguments seem to be based on the arbitrary assumption that it is. The naturalism embraced by most evolutionists is strictly anti-supernatural belief. It's a form of practical atheism. It's not by definition any more or less scientific than any other belief system. So you can believe there is no God, you're making an assumption, you can't prove it, or you believe in God. Well, you can't prove it. You can't prove there's a God. It seems obvious, and I know there is, but as far as saying, I can prove there is a God, I can prove it by this miracle, I can prove it by that miracle, I can prove it by this or that. Well, those won't support the weight of it. But you can have a relationship with him, and you can know him intimately. So, it should be noted here that dictionary definitions do not state correctly that natural science deals with the natural world. This must not be misunderstood to imply a mandatory subjection to naturalistic philosophy. There's a distinct difference between natural science and naturalistic philosophy. The former is the study of the natural world, while the latter is a belief that the natural world is all that exists. Those are distinct. Natural science and naturalistic philosophy. They'd like to merge these, and they do. They merge them. So they sound like, well, this is what science is. It's the study that the natural world is all that exists. Well, that's not true. They're imposing their belief system, atheistic belief system, on how they're approaching the study. And that's no more scientific than doing the other. So, evolution appears more credible when the essential technical details were made beyond scrutiny. You know what? So that means the more you dig into it, the closer you get to really examining these things, the more the creation portion seems viable. And we haven't had time in this class to study, but you can, I think the library probably has, well, I don't know what they have. I don't know what they still have CDs. I don't know. I had to buy an external CD player to play CDs on my computer because and yours probably don't have that option anyway. But most of the stuff you can get online, but studying feathers is one, studying the ear and the eye and those things, really getting into how they understand that they developed, is just mind-boggling. And I don't know science enough to argue that stuff, but just to see what, just in the eye, how all these things have to come together at once. Not just a little piece here, and to think that something like that, so sophisticated, so complex, just evolved from random mutation with no thought, just arbitrary random mutation. It's beyond imagining. But evolution, when you put a bumper sticker on there, just a bumper sticker phrase, and that's what they like to do, they like to really simplify it, so it seems like it's ridiculous if you don't believe this, but it doesn't examine anything. And more technical examinations, yes.
So could oversimplification be something that we
Absolutely,
use?
that's exactly what it is, oversimplification. In fact, we're gonna talk about this right now. Where are we? Okay. Right, while a simplistic soundbite approach to origins issues may be fashionable by contemporary popular media standards, genuine science remains a matter of technical details, empirical data, and thorough analysis. So these things somebody posted something. It looked like The Simpsons. It didn't look like them, but the same kind of characters. There was a lampooning the current woke stuff. Well, so anyway, and they were saying, the guy was reading an article in the newspaper, and he was misinterpreting. It was misinterpreted, and when the details were brought out, well, they had to say, well, this is technically correct. There were some art points in it, but the overall, it was misspoken. So, soundbite, things that sound good, because that's what, we don't need to go dig deep, we just want it to sound good, or sound right, or sound wrong, and then it's easy to embrace it. But without the understanding of what's behind it, you can be lulled. It's just, it's an oversimplification, huh?
And misinterpretation is another one that we
Yeah.
should look out for. What about absolute statements?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, this is fact. Well, and if it's not a fact, it's, you can say that it is, you can say a lot of things, but it doesn't have the body of weight to say that it's fact. The landscape of popular media selected science texts and peppered them with simplificant allusions to evolutionary theory as fact. Literature describing and explaining the creationary alternative, while not as plentiful, because the publishers are not inclined, the money doesn't come from creationists mostly, and so they're disinclined to present the counterpart. In fact, to be published in a secular journal and believe as a creationist, you're gonna have an uphill battle all the way, if you can get anything passed. So, huh? Okay, good questions, thank you. So, this Tox Origins archive is an evolutionary supporting website, ascribes the following set of reasonable requirements to a genuine scientific theory. A scientific theory must have predictive value, must be internally consistent, must be falsifiable, and must explain at least those phenomena explained by the current dominant theory. These traits do loosely constitute a popular norm in defining scientific theories. Excuse me. So that's not unreasonable. That's not unreasonable. But by having the terms scientific theory, science, naturalism, natural science defined with more clarity and less bias, and with a measure of information provided, one should have little difficulty seeing that the theory of creation not only exists, but also stands up rather well to a rigorous side-by-side comparison with its evolutionary counterpart. So if things are defined with clarity and do away with the sweeping generalizations, the bumper sticker slogans, and get down to some real science, it holds up, it's a lot stronger. It has predictive value, it's internally consistent, no less falsifiable than evolution, and consistently explains at least as many phenomena allegedly explained by evolution. Evolution will argue that allowing for the supernatural in general, or God in particular, opens science up to all kinds of potential crackpot notions. but it is not actually genuine science that is threatened by the prospect of God. The only threat is to a science strictly dominated by philosophical naturalism, and that's what it is. The evolutionist is invoking an arbitrary modified definition of science to imply that naturalistic philosophy is entitled to exclusive domination of the scientific community. Not true. It's no surprise that these same evolutionists keep their reasoning in a tight circle by defining the scientific community exclusively as those persons involved in the science who subscribe to philosophical naturalism. The only religious framework they're willing to tolerate. So that is a religious framework, philosophical naturalism. It believes there is no God. So it's a belief system, just like atheism. And that we study a little bit about the intelligent design movement. Intelligent design movement,
So if I'm wrong, please correct me, what I'm hearing you say is in the assignment, it says look for, my brain's, there it is, it's purple. Generalizations,
insinuations.
yes, those. Straw man arguments and assumptions, but we can also look for absolutes, misinterpretations, selective evidence, bumper sticker slogans.
Yep.
And what about a belief system that interprets evidence to the point of bias? I know we talked about how technically everything is biased because our information is interpreted by our beliefs.
Right. But if you're looking at some of the things that Wilson says, I mean, his particular selective bias is pretty strong. It comes out pretty strong in what he said.
Okay, so that would be acceptable.
Yeah, that would be acceptable.
Awesome.
I want you to think about what he's saying and try to evaluate what he says and what Timothy, Wallace says here. I mean, it's a lot of verbiage. But what he says in a nutshell is just what you have aligned, that they're coming with a philosophical, religious bias, and out of that bias, then they're making arbitrary statements about what is false and what is true. They're comparing science and religion and saying that there's a distance between the two. Well, there's not a distance between the two. Not if you look at science the way it's defined. If you say that science has to be defined with a naturalistic philosophy, well, yeah. But they're imposing a religious perspective on this well, it's like circling the wagons. They're protecting themselves, their unbelief, by defining it that way. But they are using a religious framework to do it. So he's using an atheistic framework to make the statements that he's making about religion and science. He's coming at it with a naturalistic philosophy, which itself says there is no God, period. Well, I mean, just to pick up that, just to say, well, that's where he's coming from. He's stating this, and this is why he's stating it, huh?
So in the assignment, you also mentioned about how the fact that this man is not a Christian that's not the big issue
No.
that shouldn't be highlighted.
No.
How would we go about, I guess, pulling out the fact that that argument is based off of a certain framework then, and not saying.
Okay, well, that's not just saying, okay, he's wrong because he's not a Christian.
Okay, so it's explanation.
Yeah,
Okay.
so he isn't a Christian, you know?
So my question the question that came to my mind would, obviously his worldview is shaping what he's thinking,
Absolutely.
so that's not what you want us to talk about though.
No, the fact that he's not a Christian is not, the fact that he's not a believer in God is not the important thing, but the fact that he does use a religious philosophy, he would say it's not religious. You say, well, atheism isn't religious. Well, it is. It's based on an assumption that there's no God.
So
So So he is making, he's got an assumption set that he's standing on. And naturalistic, philosophical naturalism is what they've defined it as. And they've tried to plug science into having that be what you have. So you could make an argument that what he says is based on a religious bias from his position, which is, it's not just saying, well, he's Christian, just like this, let me say, this article, he talks in the last paragraph, or the second to the last paragraph, or sentence, about, why can't we just get together and just work for the environment? Well, this article really doesn't have anything to do with the environment. He's just trying to say, look, religion and science can work together, we can all be friends, let's focus on something that's important like the environment. Well, but his whole article is not about that. It's not that he's in favor of it or opposition to it. It's how he depicts his,
So, added to that list, so distractions such as like beauty pageant statements, what would you do to solve world hunger, or something along those lines? Because what you said, he distracts it, which is, I believe, if I remember correctly, that is a different type of argument that we went over that I can't remember. But what about contradictions, where he contradicts himself directly? I was thinking about how you said that, he says, if science isn't related with religion, but if he's using his religious philosophy
He is.
to explain science,
That's
then
right.
that's a contradiction.
and he would deny that it is a religious philosophy, but there are people that don't believe in God. What's that guy's name? It's brilliant. I mean, but he can think through the arguments, and he realizes, I don't believe there's a God.
Nelson Mandela?
No.
Not Nelson Mandela,
No.
that other guy.
Yeah,
That's
the other guy.
No, because we were just talking about the other night.
In the dorm?
Yes, we were talking about, we got like how his entire thing, why he wasn't a Christian in one single video, and how it stemmed from,
Is that Jordan Peterson?
no.
Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's who I was talking about.
Okay, well, he's not a Christian. But I just watched a couple of his things, and one you saw, the others I'm not sure of. I mean, to watch him, if we were teaching this course for a semester, we could dig into some of this stuff a whole lot deeper. What I want you to do in this assignment is think. That's why I give this assignment, to stir your brains up to think. If for one thing in any of my classes, I want Christians to do, men and women, to think. You don't have to be all at the same intellectual level, but to be able to take apart what somebody says and say, oh, look at that. They're insinuating this, and it's not true. They're stating this as a fact, that's inconsistent. They're creating this argument for this thing, but this argument really doesn't have anything to do with this, yeah.
So you're not necessarily grading for like complete accuracy, but more so on the thought, or to see that we're actually thinking about what he's saying.
What he's
when we
saying.
try to- Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Yes.
And as for the layout and formation of this assignment, it's double-spaced, 12 font, and Comic Sans, correct?
You don't have to use Comic Sans.
Okay,
I like Comic Sans, but you don't have to use.
okay, but it's double-spaced, 12 font, and it's 1 inch.
Most people that are deep Christians use comics.
Okay,